if you do something that discredits me in the match, or if you get really mad publicly about something that I did, like you said that that situation itself where the wrestler didn't kick out. Now, with you discrediting me, you discredited the whole show because I'm out there over and over.
Hello, I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and you are watching Tom Talks Rubbish. It's the place for interviews, wrestling reviews, and so much more.
Sure, you subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish. I highly recommend you subscribe here first.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talks Rubbish, and today I'm back with another interview. This time, I'm joined by Christopher Wiggins, pro wrestling referee. So welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate you having me on here.
So if we take this back, before you started as a referee, before you started in the wrestling industry itself, where does Chris's fandom begin?
Ooh, very good. I'm not going to tell you based off of my experience because I'm a little bit too young, but my grandfather growing up would tell me a story all the time about being 2 years old and him watching me for the weekend or something. And he's like feeding me a little pudding cup. And I would be tuned into the television watching whatever wrestling he recorded. So whether it was WWF or like a Georgia Championship Wrestling or NWA or anything. So it goes all the way back to age 2. Third generation wrestling fan. So I live in Augusta, Georgia, and we have a small arena here called the Bell Auditorium.
Yeah.
And it's really famous for Georgia Championship Wrestling, but more or less famous in the wrestling world for Tommy Rich's one night, 24-hour NWA championship reign that he had that night. So wrestling has been, it's a staple in Georgia from where I'm from. And so my grandfather went to it. He passed it on to my dad. My dad used to go to Monday Night Wrestling all the time. And so I grew up in it. And that's as far as the fandom goes. I've been a fan for 34 years now.
So if it was sort of we'll call it a genetic thing, like passed on sort of thing, and I always get curious to know, why do you think it was your grandfather that passed it on and not your father? Because all the interviews I've done, like people's grandparents are the ones that seem to pass it on more than parents. I hope that question made sense.
Yeah, and so I really think that my grandfather just beat my dad to the punch. In other words, with me being so young, I think if my grandfather didn't have that experience with me, it definitely would have happened later on in life with my father. I just think that my grandfather, I think grandparents in general beat parents to spoiling the grandkids and doing things that parents normally go like, I don't know if professional wrestling is something that I should be showing a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, especially, the different types of pro wrestling that there were. So, we know that WWF at the time back in the 80s was more cartoonish, character-based stuff, whereas, NWA style wrestling was more of a realistic style. And that's kind of what I grew up on originally. In the first couple of years of knowing wrestling before I caught on to WWF stuff.
You brought up there catching on to the WWF stuff. What was your first exposure to the WWF then?
It would have to be the Friday and Saturday nights going to the local video store and finding those walls full of clamshell Coliseum home videos, which I knew every weekend that I would get 2 or 3 at a time and watch. Yeah. And realistically, my biggest memory going back to then was the first pay-per-view that we ever watched. And it was a WrestleMania. And I was just really blown away that this was being watched all over, the United States or even the world through pay-per-view at such a young age. I don't even remember. think it was probably like 6 or 7 at the time when I first saw my first pay-per-view. And so that's kind of where it was introduced, the Saturday night main events, way before, like, I think before we got into the Monday Night Raw kind of era.
Okay. So as we move on to like the late 80s, early 90s, what is your consumption of wrestling as you get older then?
I was I was eating as much as I possibly could be fed. I loved pro wrestling as a child, as a teenager, whatever. So on television, I would get to watch WWF. In the South, we have, TBS with Ted Turner's network. So 605 was a staple in my house as well.
Mm-hmm.
And being 2.5 hours away from WCW's headquarters, or, from the Omni in Atlanta,
Yeah.
Georgia Championship Wrestling, they would constantly move in, go through our area. So I was seeing Clash of the Champions. I was seeing the Saturday night WCW stuff that was being taped on the Tuesday, to, the early Nitros. I mean, in 95 with the Nitro and having the infamous trash can and Medusa dropping the women's title.
Yeah.
I was there for that. And
no way.
I didn't appreciate that until I didn't appreciate it so much until I got older. But thanks to YouTube, I was able to go back and look at some other things, and through the internet, looking with my dad, of looking at some of these events that I did go to as a kid, knowing that, I did go to a Clash, or that they had, or small event that somebody made a debut or something cool had happened. Just to kind of like, because wrestling, I've consumed so much, it's like it becomes a blur at times.
Yeah, definitely. So then what is something that you consumed during the blur of maybe childhood that you didn't appreciate, that you're like, okay, this was a cool moment to be a part of as a fan?
Anything involving Macho Man Randy Savage. I was such a typical American child of consuming Hulk Hogan, and I'd seen all those interactions between Hulk and Jake Roberts and Macho Man Randy Savage. So most importantly, would probably be the wedding between Macho Man and Elizabeth, with the snakes coming out of the wedding presents. Seeing that as a child, and like being kind of frightened from the situation that happened. But as I grew up and understood more of the psychology-based parts out of wrestling, I was like, oh my gosh, this was written so cool at that time frame for them to go through that process and do all those things, and what it truly meant. Even the mega powers, the time frame of them setting all this stuff up, all the big major moments. It's not so much the moments that I really look at, Hulk and Andre and WrestleMania 3. I go back as an adult and I look at how long it took them to build that up. And unfortunately, as times go on, our attention span has gotten a little bit shorter, or a lot shorter. So we can't do those long builds as we did in the 80s and the 90s. And those are things that I miss. And those are one of the reasons, like the things that I did not understand how much those things meant as a kid, and as an adult, I appreciate so much more.
You talked about missing long builds there. Do you think that's sort of a lost art in wrestling? So like, for example, a feud as we're recording this that is currently going on is in AEW is MJF versus CM Punk. They are looking at having a rematch at the pay-per-view after just having a match 2 weeks ago at time of recording.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's very recently.
So they're already looking at having another match. Do you think if this was like the 80s, they would be stretching it out a bit more? And do you think there's sort of a lost art somewhere?
I think I definitely will agree that it's a lost art. In some cases, they're capable of finding some things and being able to stretch it out. Unfortunately, like the difference between the 80s and modern time is they didn't have DVR, they didn't have weekly television.
Yeah.
They were able to kind of pull those things out. I think one of the smarter things like AEW's done is not having big pay-per-views every month.
Yeah.
And so I can understand where the rematch is coming from as far as the MJF, CM Punk thing. I think that there possibly could be a couple moments in time where they could have pushed it out and made it a little bit longer. But I think I honestly feel that they probably should have waited a little bit longer to do the CM Punk and MJF thing all together. Just give time for CM Punk to be there, to get him a little bit more acclimated with more of the talent. Maybe, have some better matches with some of the guys that we've all kind of dreamed that if we had CM Punk the whole time, what would have happened kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then maybe have some kind of nudge of some sorts to kind of plant a seed between MJF and CM Punk that eventually blossom into, like a big match at like All Out or something. But I understand fans wanted that like right off the rip, and so you kind of got to feed the fans. And so there's only so many guys that MJF can put in front of CM Punk to be able to make him, to build this matchup to finally to get the fans behind of now CM Punk finally got his hands on him,
Yeah.
So it's a small line of timing these days, and I am very thankful that I'm not part of the booking team to have to do that.
No, and I fully agree with you on that. So going back to like your wrestling journey almost, if we continue to like mid-90s to Monday Night War, what are you consuming at this point?
I definitely started backing off wrestling, more so WWF stuff, because it just got really the cartoon, the Job era. There's only so many times I can watch the Godwins, and there's so many times that I can watch Dukes of Dumpster Drosy and really just kind of not get bored.
Yeah.
And so like both companies are kind of going through this, trying to figure out what's the next big thing. And thanks to comics and like comic cartoons and Marvel kind of stepping in, there was a little bit of a space to build in there. So I ended up like mixing both in because I love action figures, and
Yeah.
I was taking my comic book world and mixing it with, my wrestling world to kind of fill the voids. And but there were times that I was still consuming it. Still watching, remember watching the WrestleMania with Bam Bam and Lawrence Taylor, and then, watching some of the Halloween Havocs and things like that. It was just something that I didn't feel that I had to go and watch every week. I wasn't consuming as much, but it was still such a huge part of my life that I just didn't let it go. And so I knew at some point in time it was going to get better because I could see that this era was going, what direction it was. At that time, I really started appreciating more of Bret Hart and Owen Hart and the Anvil and some of the guys that were trying to help, build the next level. Arn Anderson, the Four Horsemen, that generation, the Four Horsemen, like those I started, I guess, appreciating more of the workhorse guys that were going out there and putting in quality matches. And so I was noticing character work was dying down. So I was trying to find the more Mr. Perfects, the Shawn Michaels, those kind of matches to kind of fill in those voids that wasn't appealing to me as far as the entertainment aspect of the writing, I guess you would say.
Yeah. So a couple of questions just to unpack that there. What is more entertaining to you? Or what, basically I'll ask you, what's more entertaining to you now? Is it the character aspect of wrestling, or is it a good match sort of thing? Or is it a blend of the two?
I prefer the blend of the two, but I love psychology as a person. And so character development is something that always kind of drew me in. The dialogue, the battle, the conflict, if you will, like of two people, like why are they going after each other? And then how can we get there? Like how did this start? Where is it going? And where are we actually going to end up going with this? And I kind of believed at times that you could get through some bad wrestling with some great character work.
Yeah.
But you can't have the whole show full of bad wrestling and all character work, you know? So I appreciate both, but to be more honest, I would have to, I love the psychology part. I love to understand why a wrestler did that. You know, it's like just the little moments of very small things, like Jake Roberts making comments of like, in the ring, you know, like when he did promos, he would lower his voice because he knew that more people would draw that. Or when he was on the indies, he knew that if he could just get one person, he could get the whole crowd. So he just worked that one person, and then eventually the crowd would come with that. So it's like that aspect, the things that I feel that you can't really teach at times. It's just something that's natural about a person. And that's kind of really what draws me in first. The wrestling's secondary. But there's sometimes where I guess I make it secondary because I don't understand some things on why things are done. And so even it's a great 5-star match, I'm like, man, there were some things psychology-wise and character-wise like I would never do. And so that can put a bad taste in my mouth.
Is that sort of because you grew up on when the characters were more and not so much the flippy era, and then now we're in the flippy era? Does that make sense? Because it's not absolutely what you grew up on.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we call them super fans. My little group of friends that really truly understand wrestling, and we all have our different aspects of wrestling we love. But one of the things that started blowing our mind was how can we define like 50 super kicks in a match when Shawn Michaels doing a super kick
used to be the biggest thing in the world.
Right. So then we kind of, you know, learned that, oh, well, Jake doing a DDT versus, Barry Horowitz doing a DDT, you know, it's like two different types of DDTs. So one's going to be more, it's going to mean more than the other. So we've had to kind of retrain our brains to understand that like these kicks mean something, but they definitely mean more when it's coming from this particular person.
Mm-hmm. How much, living in the area that you lived in, did WCW's closure affect your wrestling fandom?
Oh my goodness. As far as being able to go to wrestling shows, live events, whether it's a house show, pay-per-view, or a TV taping of some sorts, I went from probably going once a couple of times a month to like going to none. And so fandom wise, I think that it was still good. The wrestling was still there. I'm just getting into sports. So when they closed down, I was probably like 16, 17 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I was already thinking of where am I going to go to wrestling school? Where am I going to go to college? Far as like professional wise, I was upset because ECW closed not too long before that. And that was my goal, was to go to the school that Taz had and to learn wrestling from there and be in ECW. Then when that folded, I was like, well, the power plant is several hours away. It's not that far. I live very close to WCW headquarters. And then so that shutting down really kicked me down as far as where am I going to go in wrestling, because WWE or WWF is the battle of big guys. And I'm 5'8", 5'9", depending on which doctor I go to. But from a small time, I learned that really young that I was not going to be in the WWF because I wasn't 6'4" like my dad was, and I wasn't 250 pounds like my dad. And I took the genetics of my mom, and so it was more television, and I was lucky enough we had a couple house shows come and go, but where I live at, the city's not a big draw, because the arena's not good for standards. To give you an even better understanding of why my city is terrible for wrestling, we hosted December to Dismember.
Okay, fair enough.
I was there. I was behind Joey Styles and Taz. I fell asleep on camera and got told that if I continued to do these antics, then I'm going to be removed out of the building. And
no way.
Yes, sir. And there's a couple of things that like happened throughout that time frame.
Why
But
did you fall
yeah,
asleep? Is it because, for lack of a better word, that show is trash?
it was. And I found some voice clips from like Cultaholic or like What Culture and whatnot of like 10 times fans hijacked the show. And there's two clips of from that show. One is when Paul Heyman is talking about the Big Show being in the Elimination Chamber, and he's like 7'5", blah blah. And I go, who's leaving and retiring after this pay per view? That soundbite's there. And then there's another part I think with like Khali double choke slams Tommy Dreamer on the stage, and I'm screaming, "This isn't it! This isn't extreme. This is entertainment." And the Wikipedia page, like I have a sign that's up on the Wikipedia page for that show, but it was not a good show.
Nope.
But yeah, so that's what wrestling. So the fan base just dropped dramatically.
Okay, so when does your fan base pick up and become sort of your, I'm going to become a referee then?
So realistically, in high school, I'm trying to really figure out where I'm going to go with this pro wrestling thing. And I debated about being a referee. And I'm an amateur wrestler in high school at this time because I want to get in shape. I want to learn how to be mobile. I want to have an athletic background of some sort to be able to do this. And I do what every other teenager did at that time, and I did backyard wrestling.
Okay.
And eventually the backyard wrestling was like 3 or 4 years. And the company, the backyard federation that I was wrestling with eventually saved up money and became an independent company. And so that's how I got my foot in the door of being in wrestling. I didn't start out as a wrestler. I mean, as a referee. I started out as a wrestler, and I'm really good at filming or watching video and understanding mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
So thank God, Tough Enough was around when I was growing up as a teenager, and I taught myself how to bump. I taught myself how to do the different lockups and stuff like that based off of what was on Tough Enough. And I would record them and just watch them over and over and over to kind of learn how to be a wrestler. And then eventually I started meeting people on the independent scene that would correct the things that I was doing wrong. And so it was like on the job training.
How much, and I apologize that I keep interrupting you. That's just,
oh, you're good.
How much were you doing right at that time before you met?
I would say that all of my bumps were very safe and right. Taking hip tosses and like suplexes and giving body slams were good. My footwork, as far as like running ropes, was kind of mediocre, and I would say that there was definitely for that time frame things were really good because I was very careful about what I did. I modeled my wrestling style after like Bret Hart, Jerry Lawler, guys who were a little bit more grounded, more character-based driven stuff. I would take from like Razor Ramon or Scarface and or Shane Douglas, the franchise. I watched tons and tons of ECW Shane Douglas franchise stuff to kind of get that attitude and persona, or like Rick Rude's attitude and persona when he was with the DX. So I was doing things that were right mechanically for the most part, what I was doing. The psychology behind some of the stuff that I was doing didn't match up all the time, or like my mic work. I would do things that I thought were right, but then I find out, oh, you're really burying your opponent, so don't do that.
Okay.
You know, so there was a lot of technical things of like why you grab the rope here, why you don't grab. The structure of the matches is where something they don't teach on. They didn't show you on Tough Enough. So learning how to actually put a match together properly, and understanding why I was doing some of the things I was doing is where I was missing the point.
Okay. So do you think that your amateur wrestling background helped you master the mechanics a bit more? of wrestling?
I think it definitely helped. It helped with the discipline. It helped with understanding how to do some of the things. It definitely helped me in protecting myself um, and making sure that if I got put in a situation that I could get out of.
Mhm.
Because I'd seen some guys that they really didn't know what they were doing, and then somebody would take advantage of that, and they didn't know how to protect themselves. So I understood how to like hold somebody down because it was shifting my body weight from me to them, and that was something that you learn in wrestling, to try to pin somebody. So it was definitely a step in the right direction. If I would have learned it, I think a little bit earlier in life, it would have helped me more than what it did. But it was definitely a good stepping stone.
How do you think it hindered it in some ways?
Oh my goodness. I don't think so personally it did. I don't think it hindered me because I knew why I was doing it. I see there's a handful of guys who are amateur wrestlers, and there's a couple of people who are in like mixed martial arts. And so what I see from them is them not knowing how to gauge the speed or being too tight on a hold and not knowing how to just kind of let go, just kind of loosen
Yeah.
up a little bit and understand that it's a give and take. And so they go in and they go straight after somebody. They put them out. They take them down. It's like, all right, I did good, coach. It's like, no. Like the intensity needs to slow down just a little bit. You need to loosen up a little bit, and so it's the downfalls are you're not there to win. You're there to entertain.
Yeah.
So you have to change the mindset. The good thing is that that you have an athlete and that you have somebody who's coachable. Whether you can get them out of the robotic stages or learn how to kind of loosen up and do the things that need to be done in a ring, or change a psychology standpoint from being so black and white to learning some gray areas and learning that, not everything's going to make sense like it should, but eventually it will. That those are the hard parts. I think it's the mindset you have to change from some of the athletes, like whether it be football, boxing, mixed martial arts, or amateur wrestling.
Okay. You talked about a mindset change there. So when did your mindset change of, okay, being a wrestler might not be for me, but I'm going to be a referee?
It came way later down the road. I ran the same local company that I started off with. They closed.
Mm-hmm.
And for about 2 or 3 years, we didn't have an independent wrestling company that you could actually go to on a regular basis. And I ran into the previous owner and started talking about it. So I ran a professional wrestling company for 4 years, or an indie company. And in that time frame, I decided that I couldn't wrestle and run a show and book it and do all these things. So I quit. I just was like, I had a really good match. I went out with the way I wanted to go. But over time, I realized it was really hard to find a referee on a consistent basis. So it was kind of an entrepreneurial standpoint of, I have a problem. How am I going to solve it?
Yeah.
I love professional wrestling. I'm a wrestler. I understand the psychology of it. I understand positioning. I, knew how to do, I knew how to work TV for the most part from like an indie point or from a streaming standpoint. And so I just kind of was like, let's go. And so I started at a really, really small independent company and just kind of went in there and told the owners like, hey, take a look at me. Tell me something that you can teach me because you're a trainer. Let me know.
Is this in terms of wrestling or refereeing?
This is refereeing. Yeah. So I had quit wrestling, running my company. And I went to another indie company a couple hours away and was like, can you look at me as a referee? And can you, give me an idea of where I stand in this? What can I do better? Yeah. And by the end of the night, he told me, there's absolutely nothing I can do with you. Like, you've put a lot of thought into this. You understand what's going on, and you're there when you're supposed to be, and you're not there when you're not supposed to be. So go ahead, kid, go knock it out. And I luckily was really good friends with Anthony Henry of the Workhorsemen, who was in WWE NXT and 205 Live as Asher Hale, and he's probably going to kick my butt from bringing that up. But I was very blessed to have an opportunity to book him on the independents and become really good friends with him. And we live in the same town. And when he started traveling the road, he took me along with him to try to get some more exposure and some more experience. And we ended up going to Charlotte, North Carolina to work for PWX, Pro Wrestling Experience, or Premier Wrestling Experience. And he's wrestling Tommaso Ciampa. And I'm just there with my bags, like everybody's supposed to do. Is even though you're not booked, bring your stuff anyway.
It's the wrestling cliche, right? If you don't have your gear, they can't do anything with you. Almost.
Exactly. So I meet with the booker, and the booker is very happy with me with what I've done at my independent company with Anthony Henry. And 5 minutes later, it's like, hey, gear up. And I was like, for what? He's like, you're working with me in Tommaso Ciampa. And I was like, really? This is interesting. So this was like my first big step into doing it on a bigger level than just the small town independent companies, or doing it for myself. Yeah. And that was in 2000, I want to say like 2015. So this is probably like 6 months after I'd already started kind of refereeing, just to kind of get the experience. And this was my big shot. And I'm nervous wreck because I'd never done it in front of, I think they had like 400 or 500 people there that night. I'd never worked with Tommaso. They had Roderick Strong was there at the show. The Young Bucks were there. Moose was there. So it was like all these guys, talent wise, to put the eyes on a company were there. So I was like, okay, don't mess this up. This is your opportunity to get in and to possibly go somewhere with this. And thankfully, I did a good enough job where they could bring me back in, and I kind of became Anthony Henry's personal referee for like a solid year.
That's really cool, man. So, like, continuing along your refereeing journey, you brought up the training that you went to and being told, okay, you're really good. We can't do nothing with you, like, to help you. What is something you learned in refereeing training that you maybe didn't learn in wrestling training? And what are some of the differences in the trainings? Trainings, is that a word?
Yeah. I think a lot of people overlook the psychology of a referee and how a referee has to learn psychology just as much as a wrestler does. That tempo of kind of growing as time goes on. You can't always just go straight in right off the beginning, yelling at wrestlers and telling them, hey, knock it off, all these things. You got to have that progression. And that's something that I don't think people talk about with pro wrestling, and how to properly involve referees, because you have a lot more people wanting to be wrestlers than referees. And so you don't always have a referee there to apply it to your wrestling training. Yeah. And so when I was training, when I finally started training as a wrestler, we didn't have anybody. There was nobody there that was a referee. It was always somebody kind of just playing it. And really it was just somebody doing the pins. And then like, as I go to the school and try to train other referees, or that I'm there, it's these guys that are having this understanding of really the psychology of a referee, and knowing when and where to break the rules or bend the rules, and understanding that you can't do something over and over and over again. And then you definitely can't do it in front of a referee. And then, so that's something that's not really talked about, is learning how to work with a referee to help build your story. I believe that because there aren't a lot of referees out there, or if there are referees, they really don't know what's going on. So they just kind of start learning as they go, and they're not properly trained. So they don't know how to work television. They don't know how to stay in the backside of the ring. So that way you're facing the hard cam, or you're not in the way of a photographer at the ring, or people who, what we call roamers on the sides, or learning how to position the wrestlers who've never worked television. You know, they're in a hold, and it's like, guys, quarter turn to your right, quarter turn to your right.
For the
So
hard cam and stuff.
Yeah. So you're moving them. And those are things I think that aren't taught at a wrestling school, either to wrestlers or referees at times. Those are things that I picked up like watching, you know, WWE, or going to the live events and sitting by production. And thank goodness, like, I've gotten to know some guys that have been down, you know, with WWE, and they've explained some things to me of like how to get better. So I think it's like the understanding of what a referee can do for you in your match, that they can make your match better, or they can really stink up the place and make your match worse. So it's just a hard understanding. And I think people don't really understand that until they come across that point. Thankfully, like the school that I go to in Columbia, South Carolina, Palmetto Wrestling Academy, they understand the value of a referee. And there are times where we'll stop a match and it's like, hey, the psychology of this, was the direction we were going with it, could it possibly bury the referee? Because we don't want to do that. The heat needs to stay on whomever's trying to get it. We don't need the heat to transfer over to the referee. And it's like my job to make sure that that never happens, because I have an opportunity to, you know, to change some things throughout the night to get the heat back off of me, but they only have one opportunity to get the heat on them.
Yeah.
So it's really a psychology standpoint. I think to really wrap that up is more or less of the understanding of like how a referee can help your match out and not just be used there as a bumper, you know, like, oh, we're gonna do a ref bump. You know, that's not necessarily something we need to do. There's other ways we can do things.
Yeah. How different is learning, as someone that's done both referee training and wrestling training, how different is learning to bump as a wrestler and then bump as a referee?
Yeah. So as a wrestler, you're bumping, you're taught how to bump, you're taught how to roll. And even as a referee, depending on what school you go to, you'll learn those same things. So they want you to know how to kind of protect yourself. The difference is like all the wrestlers relatively bump the same. As a referee, you can't bump exactly like a wrestler, because you don't want people to know that like you've had some type of wrestling training, because people don't look at you that way. So you have to learn how to strategically get bumped and land where it looks like a car crash, but safe at the same time.
Yeah.
So I don't take like because your situations aren't necessarily the same as you were being slammed or hip tossed or suplex. You know, you're learning how to protect yourself, and then you're having to learn how to do more face bumps, and then how to sell that to where you don't look super dead. And it's kind of hard to explain to people how to do it. A lot of people want you to do when they call for like ref bumps in the match, they want you to lay there like Earl Hebner would do for like 10 minutes.
Oh,
so
well, Undertaker elbowed him, for example.
Right. So like I try to find ways. I look at as a referee, I look at it as a camera scene, you know, like a film scene, like you're filming the show. And so it's a scene like being filmed in a movie. So when I get hit, I have to find a way to remove myself from the scene itself. Yeah. So generally I try, depending on how bad the bump is or how long I need to be gone, knocked out, I'll roll away, fall on the ground, and just kind of lay there. So at that point, then just maybe one side sees me. And then eventually something happens to where they don't look at me anymore. I've done things where I knew there was another referee coming back because I was supposed to be gone the whole time. I'll slide underneath the ring and just completely remove myself from the area so you don't ever see me again. And then I wait till the crowd leaves, and then I walk out, you know, depending if it's like an intermission or like a main event or something like that. There's just an art form to it. And it's something that I believe that you have to kind of think about it. it's hard for me to explain at times because being a wrestler helped me out so much at being a referee.
Do you think, and this sounds like and I keep interrupting you, I do apologize.
I'm a tangent guy, so I will talk for a very long time.
Do you think you could be a referee if you didn't have wrestling experience?
I think so. I believe personally, people do it every day.
For you personally,
for me personally, I love wrestling that much. That was one of the things that once I had fixed the problem for me as an independent guy, or being a promoter, the reason why I wanted to venture out more is because I love wrestling that much. And I wanted to find some job that I could do that's in the wrestling business. When I was a teenager, going through adolescence and realizing that I wasn't going to be this massive 6'2", 6'4" guy, I was like, how do I get into the wrestling business? And so it was like, well, I'll go to college for like sports physical therapy or medicine of some sorts, and that'll be my end. And then I kind of just got to steer away. So I've always tried to find a way to be part of wrestling. And I believe that being a pro wrestling referee, whether it be a ring announcer, commentator, even the guy who just puts the ring up and tear it down, like as long as I'm involved in it, I'm happy. Yeah. And I will find a way to be involved in it. And I just think that I happen to be really good at being a referee. And it's taken a lot of work. It's not all natural, but it's taken a lot of work to get to where I'm at.
If I said to you, look, you could give up being a referee, but I could guarantee you'll be a star now if you started wrestling again. Was that something you take, or are you like, no, I love being a referee now?
So I knowing now, like I would definitely want to be a referee still. One of the medically wise, being on the road, wrestling, being a full-time firefighter, being a part-time EMT, like I'm doing a lot of lifting. And so I was kind of having some issues with my back at one time. It was really just a lot of muscle spasms from lack of stretching after.
Preach, I have cerebral palsy. I know what muscle spasms are, my friend.
So you get the muscle spasms and understand, like, they hinder you from doing, for being comfortable. Mm-hmm. And so going to a doctor and him just laying it out, I was like, look, unless you're going to be a full-time wrestler, you got to learn how to do something different.
Was it almost like, I know that the more people wrestle, the more they develop calluses, but because you were only doing it occasionally, was that why it was hurting your body, sort of thing?
Right. Yeah. So it was definitely hurting me more because my body wasn't getting used to it. I wasn't spending a lot of time limbering, stretching before and after shows. So there are things that I probably could have done to help the situation out. But then being full-time firefighter, like wearing the gear all the time. So my body was going through stress all the time, but was going through different types of stress. And so my back was tensing up and I was going through physical therapy, and it helped out a good bit. But eventually it was kind of like, you need to choose which way you want to go with this. If you want to have a higher quality of life down the road. And I'd realized, my wrestling career was a hobby for me, essentially. Like the time frame that I was going through, I wasn't going anywhere with it. I was working full time. I wasn't spending as much time on my wrestling career and investing in myself in that aspect. It was just something that was making me happy. Yeah. And, I wanted to focus more on being a better booker and a better promoter, and knowing that having to run a 3-hour show and worry about a 15, 20-minute match and having to make sure that I was okay to do that and that I was warmed up to be able to do it. I eventually found that it put a lot of stress on me and hindered my performance, whether it was the promoter side, booker, or wrestler side. So that's kind of why I gave it up, like mentally wise. And physically, my doctor didn't have to sell me really hard. It was like, hey, yeah, you could relieve a lot more stress if you quit wrestling. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, it benefits me in so many different ways. being a pro wrestler, being a pro wrestling referee, I have a front row seat to all the good matches, and that's what I really love about it. Um, I have 2 kids, so that was another reason. Like I knew at the time that I quit wrestling, I wanted to have kids. I was engaged, and so I didn't want to be. I looked at my dad and I saw the years of him playing sports from, adolescence all the way up to being into his 30s. I was like, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be broken, beaten down. There was a lot of information of like the guys from like the 70s and 80s who worked really hard. There was stuff coming in from NFL about people, just being beat up from not taking care of themselves and not having a quality of life. And I didn't want to do that. So I made the decisions like, all right, cool, we'll just stop wrestling, but we're still involved in the business. And let's move forward.
You seem really at peace with the way your wrestling career ended. But if you hadn't discovered refereeing or another outlet to be involved in the business, do you think you would be as at peace, if that makes any sense?
I think anything other than refereeing, I don't think I would be at peace with it, because it took me a while to become at peace with it, because I was watching some of the guys that I was wrestling with move up, learn more. I was meeting more people that I was like, man, I could have a lot of fun with them. Being in the middle of the ring and having the people cheer for you, and that adrenaline rush that came with it. It wasn't so much the notoriety or the fame or being noticed, because I could really be more in the back of the crowd and be happy with that. Because I'm naturally an introvert. I talk a lot, but I'm naturally an introvert. So I kind of just which makes me such a better referee, because I don't have to have that. I like being there. I like seeing people being happy. Like, the best part about being a promoter and being a booker was knowing that I was taking something from my mind, writing it on paper, then taking people and creating what I envisioned, but letting them put letting them be an artist and put their spin on it, and then see how the people reacted to it. So as time went on, I had kids. My wrestling promotion only lasted for 4 years. It was from 2012 to 2016. I shut it down because I was kind of like, we're at a place where we can either go up or we can go down. And I'm really happy where we're at. And I kind of want to do something different in my life. So we kind of just shut it down and put it on the back burner. And it never resurfaced, which, it was a good thing for me. It was a good thing for other people that were involved in it. But the thing I took away from it was seeing kids grow up that were like 8. Memories and creating moments, and that's another thing that helped me.
Right. For those of you that are watching the video, there'll be a cut because my internet just went. So anyway, you were saying, Chris, about why you shut your promotion down and stuff like that.
So just running promotion, it was fun. So that helped me learn different aspects of it and love wrestling, to allow me to remove myself from being a wrestler. And I don't think there's anything about wrestling that I don't love. Like it's given me so much in my life. It helped me through the separation of my parents. It's allowed something from myself and my father to have something to bond over. It's something my sister and I bond over. And it's given me an opportunity to meet so many different people, including some of the guys that I grew up like watching, and being able to like share stories with some guys. You know, I was lucky to be involved in like a legend show in my hometown at the university here, and speaking to Ted DiBiase about the Monday night wrestling shows that they did in Augusta, or you know, have an opportunity to talk to like Jimmy Hart and have his understanding of like an ology standpoint of what a referee should do, or what it, you know, what I did wrong, what I did right, or just learn, you know, different aspects of the business. So if my whole journey were to end today, I would be extremely satisfied, because I just didn't expect myself to be this far and to do as much as I've done, and to have, you know, met so many people. And yeah, so running the promotion was fun, and you know, wrestling has been very good to me.
So we go sort of into refereeing. Like, one thing I am curious to know, we are told that WB and TV professional companies are supposed to call it like a shoot. So if something goes wrong, like if the wrestler forgets to kick out, that is the main one. Wrestler, basically you count the 1, 2, 3. Is that the same on the indies?
Yes, and it depends. So it is. We're always supposed to call it that aspect. And the way I've explained it to other people, predominantly wrestlers, was if you do something that discredits me in the match, or if you get really mad publicly about something that I did, like you said that that situation itself where the wrestler didn't kick out. Now, with you discrediting me, you discredited the whole show, because I'm out there over and over and over, and I've told wrestlers, like, I will work with you to the best of my ability. And so there are little tactics that I've done to kind of give more time to understand the entertainment part of it, to know that like a 10 count isn't a strong 10 count, you know. But as far as the kicking out moment, that's really on the wrestler, because that's not something that I can take back, really, you know. So I have to go with it. I've learned to give myself some time as how I pin people, the cadence of it, to give them an opportunity to really, if I get messing up, like I notice that they're not going to kick out, then I can go ahead and go with it. Or if I know that they're really, I had one guy for a long time, he would try to get my cadence down so close on his finishes and his falsies to make it more believable that he's kicking out. And I was like, buddy, if you keep on waiting to the very last second, there's going to be a day where I count your shoulders and you're going to be really, really mad. So don't wait for this very last minute, like little, really small second to kick out, because it's not going to work out for you. And, you know, what I say to new referees that are getting into it, that are worried about that, it's, if that happens, just hope that like the promoter or the booker has your back, because they should. Because it's up to the wrestler to kick out. It's not my job to make sure that they kick out.
Yeah.
It's to pin his shoulders down, essentially. So those things happen. I definitely say that people get more upset that if you don't count somebody like that, like if you don't call it as a shoot. The more professional the wrestlers are, the more they get upset about those things that you don't do, as like calling it as a shoot. So I've been lucky to work with people who were really young and didn't understand, to work with guys who've been in WWE, who have done tons and tons and tons of television. And it's like completely two different worlds of working with guys who are professionals, who understand it and know that they're not going to put you in those kind of positions to make you look bad, because if they make you look bad, then eventually they look bad, and then the whole show looks bad. So that's kind of like the big thing. And WWE is pretty strict about trying to make sure you do call it as a shoot, because it's on camera and there's
so
tons
we
of people
don't
there.
get the hard. So we don't get the El Hebner at the, I think it was Royal Rumble 2000, I think, where he forgets it was the finish, and basically he's telling Kurt Angle to kick out, but Rock's like, "That's the finish, you idiot."
Yeah, those situations happen, and I use those as teachable moments for anybody going through training or just in general. It's like they're professionals; they do this way more than we do on the indies, but it happens. Like, we're humans; we're gonna make mistakes, and don't beat yourself up about it. Just knock it off your shoulders, move on to the next thing, and then look at how how to get away from that. I mean, I've made those mistakes. The finish had gotten changed in the middle of a match one time, and that information was not passed on to me. And luckily, I had found a way to cover it up based on the story, and I was able to tell the story to help it out because I was really quick on improving. Mm-hmm. And being an EMT and a fireman, it looked like from a medical standpoint that I was stopping to check on the wrestler, from which eventually that's exactly what I ended up doing. But if you're going to mess up, you better figure out a really good way to not give your oh crap face away and figure out how to get past it in that match and improv and just move around it.
What is, say you're opening a wrestling referee school, what is 5 pieces of advice that you would give to your students or you would give to upcoming referees?
Learn that you're not the main attraction. People are not there to see a referee all the time. We've learned about referees that have become famous, like Earl Hebner or Charles Robinson or Aubrey, Tommy Young from the 80s and stuff like that. So, and they became famous because of their work and what they were doing. You're essentially an extra in this show, and you're a stage handler. So if you come in with an ego and try to be a superstar, you're going to find out really quick that people aren't going to want to work with you. And so you have to learn your place and your value. And when you figure that out, you'll learn how to do your job a lot better. One of my favorite things to do is to go and look at pictures and see how many pictures I can find that I'm in. So then I can go, okay, well, there's 100 pictures of this match. I was only in like 5. So there's 95 other opportunities that I was not in frame because that's what I wasn't supposed to do. Mm-hmm. So it's learning to be heard and not seen. Be in the background. And another thing that I had to learn was learning how to get up and down quickly from a physical aspect. So, doing a lot of exercises where, my cardio was, heart rate was going up and down, up and down, up and down. Because there's times where you just got to go where, the guys are doing so many falsies back to back. Or you get this crazy roll up where the guys are rolling around the whole ring in a small package. And so they're just doing that. And you have to be able to bounce back and forth and not die or show that you're dying. So it just because you're not physically involved in the wrestling as a wrestler doesn't mean that you can go in and not have some type of, exercise, regimen that you need to do, or doesn't mean you get to go straight from the couch eating potato chips to go and be a referee and then expect to be successful. So it's kind of like everything. You got to put the work in if you want to do that. And it's different types of work.
Okay. So then, do you think with the referees, like you say, being in the background, that is why less people want to be referees almost?
I believe so. I believe that people get into wrestling from the aspect of, or some people get into wrestling because they want that superstar. They want to be, an MJF, or they want to be an Adam Cole or Steve Austin or CM Punk. They want that. They want that notoriety. They want that, pop from the crowd. And so people don't want to be referees, or they don't want to be the production side of it. There's so many different aspects of wrestling that people don't ever think about They just look at what's in the spotlights. They don't understand all the other puzzle pieces that make it so those guys can be in the spotlights.
Yeah.
And so I as a booker, I would tell guys at times, know what you're really good at. Like Paul Heyman said in the documentary Beyond the Mat, we're really good at insinuating the positives and like hiding the negatives.
Yeah.
And so I would always like to go look at guys and go, you're not a really good wrestler and you're not in the best shape, but you are extremely funny. So let's find out ways that we can take your comedy side, your personality, and let's make it a character. You like video games? Cool, let's do a video game bit. You like comics? Let's do a comic bit. Find those ways, because there's other ways to be in a main event than being the best wrestler. Or like your job is to sell the tickets. Sometimes the main event is what draws people, but knowing that you're at this show, people will come to see you. So find out what you're good at. And I think people don't look at it that way, like, oh, I'm just a referee. And because on the independent level, referees are looked at as, oh, we don't have a good one. Let's go to the sporting goods store. Let's go buy a shirt, throw it on a guy,
Yeah.
And so that's where like I take that really personally. And so I learned different ways that I felt that, how do I make a professional wrestling referee? Like, what do I think a professional wrestling referee looks like? And it was this routine of, going and, getting a haircut before a show. Now that I've grown a mustache. And
randomly, I was just going to
like
ask you your routine on show day.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm jumping way ahead of you, my friend. I'm so sorry, but yeah, so getting into that, like show day, I beforehand, like if I'm within 2 or 3 hour driving distance, and I go see my barber, fresh cut, styled, getting the mustache trimmed, I try to make sure that I shave as closely to the show that I possibly can, because I like clean shave.
Yeah.
And making sure that like I have more moisturizer in my mustache, or and now like I'm trying to get a little bit more tan. I'm already naturally tan as it is, but I try to get a little bit darker for different reasons, and making sure that clothes aren't wrinkled, and that I have everything matching. And it's just I want to look as professional as I possibly can, because if I look professional and I look like somebody that has authority, then the wrestlers will respect me from a personal and professional standpoint. And then the fans will go like, that other guy, he was wearing jeans and some tennis shoes and his shirt was halfway undone. I really didn't believe anything he was doing. But this other cat that walked out, he looked like he was ready to go like referee a sporting event, or like a UFC fight or something like that, and like we're going to take him seriously. And that's kind of the difference, is like this match is going to be really good.
Mm-hmm. So as we wrap this up, because I do really want to be respectful of your time, because I'll be honest, guys, we're recording this on Valentine's Day, and I'm sure this man wants to go spend some time with his woman.
Absolutely, yeah. She's gracious. She decided she's like, take your time for a couple of hours. I'm gonna give you some time, because she knows I like to talk a lot, and I really like to talk a lot about wrestling. So I'm gonna take the kids away for a little bit. You got the house yourself. Go do your interview, but after you're done, like you better have some time set away for me.
Yeah. So as we wrap this up, Chris, obviously I want to say thank you for coming on. But the question I end all my interviews on is, with technology being the way it is right now, with stuff like that, with podcasting, with YouTube, with just phones in general, we're all going to sort of live forever in some sort of ways. So what is one match that you've refereed or been in that you want the people to check out on YouTube? And then what is one that you're like, don't go back and watch that, I've grown a lot since then, or like, something happened in that match that I don't like, or you know what I mean? Like, What is one that you want
Yeah,
the people
absolutely.
to check out? And then what is one that you're like, if that could be burned and destroyed, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah. So I'd have to say October of 2021, my really good friend Anthony Henry made his debut back on the Indies, and it was for PWX, and he got to wrestle. Oh goodness gracious! I'm like getting nervous just thinking about it. He got to wrestle Suzuki, and
Ooh.
I'm not nervous for the fact that it was Suzuki. It was a bittersweet moment for me because Anthony Henry brought me in to he brought me into PWX, and he was coming back and I was still there, and he wanted me to be there when he returned. And now months later I'm getting to understand, like, oh, I was so focused on us having our moment that I was overlooking the fact that we were having a moment with Suzuki, and knowing that, like, Suzuki was Anthony's one of his favorite wrestlers to work and to watch. Like, sharing that moment with him, like, means a lot for me, and it's one of the things that, like, I bring up a lot, and a lot of people think, oh, it's because you were with Suzuki. It's like, no, it's because I was with Henry, working one of his favorites, like one of his heroes. And that's the moment that I had, that I was able to share a moment with one of my friends. I would probably say, goodness. Now, on the negative side, I don't know if this footage
This is
is
the
out
one that I look forward to. I'm not gonna lie.
on the negative side, and it's actually held on to me pretty for a long time. This footage probably isn't out there anymore, but I was refereeing a scramble match with like 5 other guys. And I'd be honest, I can't remember the guys that were actually in it. I remember a particular spot, and it was leading into a falsely going into elimination, and the guy got lost on what the move was going to be. So he just did his finisher, and I didn't know it was this guy's finisher, but I knew that this guy was fixed to do something else out of this pin, and then they were going to get eliminated. They were going to do an elimination. And so I did the ultra sin that we were just talking about. I did the 1,
no, I see
2,
where this is going.
and I go to do a complete sweep, and I'm like, kick out, kick out, kick out, and he didn't. And I did the sweep so long that I was trying, like, my soul came out and tried to grab my arm and pull it back up and put it in the right place. But I did the sweep, and he didn't kick out. So I had to figure out a way to play it out, and the guy chewed my butt out in the back. And I took it as a professional, and then I asked him, I said, why didn't you kick out? Because that was not what we discussed, right? And he goes, well, that was so-and-so's finish. I said, nobody here knows that this is his finish. This is the first time we've been at this area.
Yeah.
I didn't even know it was that guy's finish. Now, I wasn't making it up an excuse or justifying, but I really didn't understand, like, where the mindset came from. But it was like one of those things that I was hoping that the cameras didn't make it look as bad as I thought it was. And the booker, who was my friend, came to me and was like, Wiggins, and you're better than this. Don't ever do that again. Just call it like a shoot. Remember, call it like a shoot. If they get mad at you, they'll deal with me.
You can deal with that later, sort of thing.
Exactly. Like, don't worry about it. They messed up, not you. So prevent yourself from doing that again. And that was like the one thing that I, was like, get over that part. And it's something that I thought about. I was like, I'm going to mess up. It's going to be the pin. I'm going to do that. And it's, of course, it's one thing we're not supposed to do.
Yeah. So obviously I want to say thank you for coming on, Chris, but where can the good people find you before we wrap this up?
Yeah. So you find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, even. All under Referee Wiggins. You can probably, I'm building a brand now. Like, I don't know if you can see much of it, but I got a little Ref Stache thing going on here. So using the hashtag Ref Stache is something that I'm trying to build now. It's actually, the mustache was grown as an icebreaker and a joke within the Firehouse, and it has drawn a lot of attention in the pro wrestling world for me. So, I figured I'd go and try to market myself a different avenue, and here I am. I've actually gotten a couple extra bookings based off off the brand and off the mustache. So I want to tell you, Tom, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and it's been I've had fun. So we had that little mishap, but we bounced back. We moved on, and that's what we're supposed to do. So.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, I want to say, as I say, thank you to Chris for coming on. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish. Share this video around, help the channel grow. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Talks Rubbish, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Bye.